Hey, good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm Mark Campbell. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So that's my dumb joke. We're done, right? Hey, this is the hangover shift, right? So they got me up here first. So got to get you guys' blood moving a little bit. How about a big round of applause for all the guys that are running the sound, the cameras, the boards. That's quite a show. It is quite a show. Well, as Todd almost introduced correctly, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Trace3 here, which is kind of a bizarre title, right? So part of my job today is to kind of convince you that I've actually earned that title, and I'm not sure I'll succeed, but that's okay. One of the things that we find when we talk to our customers is most IT leaders out there really have this burning desire to be innovative, creative, relevant, and make a difference in their company. However, there's a little bit of a problem that they all encounter, and hopefully this will resonate with you guys, right? The first thing is exactly how do I innovate? You guys have seen and had the opportunity to visit a bunch of really cool emerging tech companies, a bunch of established incumbents that are rolling out new products to the market every day. That's great, that's terrific, but of course innovation is more than just a product, right? So a lot of our customers ask us about the practices, the pitfalls, what other customers are bumping into, how they're solving their problems. And while they're doing that, they still have a day job, right? So how do I innovate while I'm actually running my business? To put this in kind of football terms, because that's kind of a theme, right? How do I go ahead and run the game plan and call audibles? By the way, how awesome was Peyton Manning yesterday, right? Dude. By the way, I don't know if you guys saw this, but the Vegas odds out there were 7-2 that Tyler would introduce him as Walter Payton. So we'll throw back humor there. Okay, all right. So our customers typically are grappling with these two conflicting things. How do I innovate? How do I run my business? There's a couple ways to solve this, of course, right? One is call a timeout and go ahead and take 2 years off, read about the 40 relevant books on the topic, go to about 30 or 40 conferences on that, or make it up as you go. So that's certainly one approach. But there are a ton of thought leaders out there that have done an amazing amount of work, and a lot of them are you guys yourselves, because none of this really matters until a real customer actually grapples with this. So we decided to cheat. We decided to go and talk to the thought leaders. We decided to go to a bunch of conferences, read a bunch of books, but more importantly, talk to a lot of you out there. So if you guys have had conversations with me or my team on what problems you're facing, this is our opportunity to waste an hour of your time and then charge you to come back and hear us tell you what you told us, right? So that's called innovation. We have had a bunch of thought leaders that we've reached out to that have actually been on the Evolve stage. Guys like Eric Ries, Chris Laping, Patrick Lencioni, Gene Kim. Those folks out there have done a tremendous amount of work, and I think you guys all know them and have adopted a lot of their processes internally. So what do we mean by innovation, right? This is one of the core questions here. There's a lot of terrific academic definitions out there, and again, I could have put 50 of them up here. But the one that we find to be most relevant is from, he calls himself the Dean of Innovation out of the University of Michigan, a guy named Jeff DeGraff. He calls it positive deviance, and I think that cuts right to the heart of the matter. If we take a look at most companies, you have the market that you live in, both internally, right? Your processes, your standards, your customers, your optimizations, the status quo, your product set. But there's also external things, the press, your competition, the constant march of technology. These are all of the, what we're gonna just generally call the market. Now you're gonna come along and you're gonna try to implement some change, right? We're gonna try and change the market. Unfortunately, we've got two forces at play here. One of them is compliance. All the processes in your company, your compliance groups, your SDLC, your ITIL processes are all in there to enforce compliance, right? You're trying to deviate from that. Well, I'll put it this way, if you're not deviating from that, that's not really innovation, right? So you're trying to deviate from that. And unfortunately, one of the very common side effects is when you go to change, you wind up being negative deviance. By the way, when you go back, you can tell everyone that you were in Vegas and learned a lot about negative deviance. Your company's structures and processes are built and made to resist that. So this is kind of the natural tension that we see in our customers that we speak to. We're going to talk about positive deviance. That's a little bit different, right? The idea here is if we can move the fulcrum to the left, we then only need to make a relatively small change to actually move the market. And this works terrific in PowerPoint. It's insanely difficult to actually pull off in real life. So let's talk about the patterns that we're seeing in our customers. When we go out and we do talk to hundreds of customers a year, one of the patterns that quickly emerges is there are a series of steps that successful innovators tend to go through. There are a series of decisions they make. There are a series of tasks that they have to do to deviate from the market, make a decision that you're going to innovate, actually find the innovation you're going to implement it, and deploy it into the marketplace, right? So there's this outer cycle that we're constantly deviating from the market, implementing a change, introducing it back, but there's also an inner cycle here, right? There's the, do we do this? Let's implement it. Did we do this? And what did we learn from it? And let's cycle through that until we have something that we can drop off into the market. Now, if you have an innovation process that only focuses on that outer cycle, you're going for the grand slam. You're up to plate. You're swinging for the fences on every pitch, right? This is basically a binary type of process. You either fail or you succeed. By the same token, if you only focus on that inner cycle, where you're innovating, constantly going through changes and learning, and you've got a bunch of guys on your team that know words like Scrum and Agile and Iterative and Spiral, if that is all you're focusing on and you're never actually deploying it or analyzing what needs to be done in the market, then that's just really a science project. But if you couple the two, you kind of wind up with the grand slam science project, and that's kind of what you want. So this is our pictorial representation of what we see a lot of folks do. We collectively call this the innovation framework. In the framework, there's really 3 decision points. Should we innovate? Do we want to innovate again? Did we innovate? And there are 3 tasks. How do we find the opportunity to innovate on? How do we actually innovate? And what did we learn from an innovation cycle? For each of these, we've collected the 3 most common questions that we hear from our customers, and then we've gone out to try and research the literature, industry thought leaders, to try to come up with answers, techniques, but more importantly, pitfalls to avoid while answering these. So we're going to dig into a couple of them. Let's start with the first one, the should we phase. By the way, these 3 questions here, are these things that you guys have grappled with? A round of applause if you guys have asked any of these types of questions. Nice. Let me see that. 38.5% of you. That's higher than I expected. That's very good, very good. We're going to dig into the middle one here, the why innovation, right? In a Simon Sinek kind of a way, if you're not starting with the question of why, you're just going through an academic exercise. We're going to look at a technique. This is called the Greek triad. It is important because when you look throughout all of business at innovation changes, there's about a 70% failure rate. The guys at Gallup came up with that. There's good news, though, if you're in IT, because we're really, really smart, super educated, and good. Actually, we fail way more than business in general. We fail at about a 90% rate. So if you've been on a failed project, woo, keep that number up. Yeah, represent. If that's the case, right? If that's the case, then why even innovate? I mean, why do this? So we're back to that question of why? Well, let me give you 3 reasons why you should not innovate. Now, this comes from a thought leader. He's a Greek dude. This guy, cutting edge technology from the year 411 BC. This guy named Thucydides. You can say his name, it makes you sound super, super smart. He came up with this idea that there are 3 primary motivations for disruptive human activity. Fear, honor, interest, if you prefer more modern terms, fear, pride, and greed. Now, he was applying this to killing Spartans, right? He was an Athenian, he was killing Spartans. Apologies, by the way, for any Michigan State fans out there. So he came up with this, and when we take a look at innovation, these are 3 reasons why you should not, right? I mean, if you're afraid of causing production outages, if you're afraid of making your boss look bad, if you're afraid of the political capital that you're gonna have to expend that may have no results, please do not innovate. But to balance this, here's 3 reasons that you absolutely should innovate. Bad news, it's the same thing. So what we're saying here is that you should innovate if you fear the market is going to outstrip you. You should innovate if you want to increase your corporate brand. You should innovate if you're looking to gain market share, right? These are the same demotivators are the motivators. So what we really have here is a balance between fear, honor, and interest. And in looking at this, if you decide that your fear of failure outweighs the fear of tomorrow's and today's market, then, hey, run. Like, don't do it. Don't be part of the 70 to 90%, right? Just stop. On the other hand, if you believe that the opportunity of changing business as usual and moving the market along, go for it. So there's the Greek triad. Not rocket science, right? Dude, if the Greeks can do it, we can do it. The next, I'll give you another example here. This is how do we actually find the opportunity that we're going to innovate on? And we're going to talk about this push-pull model. Now, the idea here is that we've got 2 primary sources that we can get ideas for what innovations are going to affect the market in the most positive way. One is external, our customers primarily. One is internal, our own internal folks and expertise. So if we're pulling ideas from our customers, there's a lot of smart people that are going to tell you that we're doing the right thing here, right? An awful lot of brains up on those quotes there that are basically saying, if you're not listening to your customer, what's the point? It turns out there's another group of really smart people that say, no. Old Henry Ford here, is saying, if I'd asked my customers, they would have just said they wanted faster horses. By the way, I don't think Henry Ford actually said that, but that's okay. That's okay. So it turns out that we've got kind of these 2 opposing points. If you go look at the research is a little equivocal on this, right? About 60% of successful projects come from that pulling answers from your customers. But that's not a very good number to go batting on. Well, it turns out it depends where you get your sources for innovation on your why. Remember we just talked about the Greek triad, that why? If your goal here and the reason that you're doing an innovation is to resolve a problem, you should probably talk to your customers. If you're trying to revolutionize your market space, you should probably talk to your internal folks that probably have 10 terrific ideas already in their back pocket. So we can join these 2 together in the framework, this should we and this find, right? If our reason for innovating is resolving, evolving, or revolting, then it turns out there's a 1-to-1 correlation on whether we should use a pull model, a push model, or some hybrid in the middle. And if you get these wrong, you're part of the 70 to 90%, right? So one of the textbook examples, of course, is Blockbuster. They felt the big threat of Netflix coming on. They did a study where they went and talked to their customers. Number 1 answer they got back and implemented was, we want faster checkout lines. You can imagine that that's really just a resolving of a problem where someone else was revolutionizing their industry. By the way, how many millennials we got in here? Okay, not enough for me to have to explain what Blockbuster is. Because I'd have to use terms like VHS and tape. It would be by the way, millennials, very, very confident generation. We've got some terrific millennials at Trace3. You can always tell them because they walk around like they rent the place. You guys think that's stupid, but you are so telling that when you get back, right? I know that, right? So let's go ahead and we're going to take a look at our last example here. This is from the learn phase, right? So we already know why we're innovating. We've already found a great target to go with. We've gone through a series of questions that I'm not going to go through here, talking about, yeah, we think we're going to do this. We're committed to it. This is the opportunity. This is the right time. We got the right people. We got the right budget. We're going, right? We've implemented it. At the end of it, we've taken a look at our implementation. And now we're going to take a step back and say, what did we learn? Did we learn that this is good enough to take to production? Did we learn that we need another couple laps around the track? And so there's some key questions here that we have to ask. We're going to talk about this what did we learn phase. And we're going to look at both a technique to help us learn, and we're also going to look at a pitfall of what not to do. So again, because I'm really, really current, we're going to go back to World War II here, 1944. Holy cow. Big data project, right? So the US Army Air Corps built this Hadoop cluster. No, I don't think that's right. But they decided that they had a big problem. They had these Allied aircraft that were going over, and against the wishes of the Germans, they were dropping bombs on Germany. Well, when they came home, they found out that these aircraft very often have bullet holes in them. So they got a bunch of folks with clipboards to run out to the British airfields, and when the American planes would come and land, they would count, literally, they would have pictures of a plane, and they would count the size and the location of the bullet holes these aircraft received. The idea was that we can't put armor everywhere on an aircraft, otherwise we can't carry bombs or fuel or people, and so therefore we can only put armor where it is most needed. So after tons of data collection, clear patterns definitely started to emerge. They went ahead and modified a bunch of the aircraft to where they had armor in the areas that were receiving the most damage. And almost immediately, the losses started to soar. And they were very, very confused by this. This didn't make a lot of sense. Why exactly would that happen? Must be a problem in our data, a problem in our process. So they took this data over to Columbia University, and this gentleman, Abraham Wald, amazing guy, by the way, family barely escaped the Nazis in 1938, Vienna, made it over to the US, actually did not have his credentials with him, but got a job at Columbia University working in the custodial department. There was a group called the Statistical Research Group. Yeah, I mean, if you think the name of your group is boring, how about that one, right? Does that just engender all kinds of excitement? Anyway, they realized that the janitor was pretty darn smart at calculus. And eventually, they wound up adding him to the group. He looked at the data for less than an hour and said, oh, well, I know what the problem is. You actually need to put the armor where there's the least amount of data. And they're like, well, okay, let me explain that one more time. No, we counted the bullet holes. These are legit bullet holes. Like, we've got this data. That's kind of the craziest thing. And he brought out the salient point that everyone else had missed. You're counting bullet holes on the airplanes that survived. What you really need is to protect for the bullet holes on the aircraft that didn't survive. And he says, plus my grandpa could take a look at this and tell you that, hey, the places you don't put armor right now are the cockpit and the engines. Guess what? We need those to fly airplanes. So even just from a common sense cursory point of view, you would think that might be a good place to put it. But this phenomena is called survivorship bias. And as soon as the US Army Air Corps started putting armor on engines and cockpits, losses started to decrease. Now you might say that's a really, really cute story, and what does that got to do with IT nowadays? Well, this technique of counting bullet holes is coupled up with a best practice myth. Now, it is a best practice in our industry to study best practices. And one of the things about studying best practices is when you learn to do something and to do it well and to repeat that, that's the definition of compliance. Remember our compliance and deviation, right? This is positive compliance. This is what your company does terrifically on day-to-day operations, right? This is counting bullet holes. To do innovation, we need to deviate. We need to sometimes do exactly the opposite. So we need to study worst practices in order to figure out how the most effective way to deviate. So we need to figure out how to put the armor where it's actually needed. Now, I don't know if you noticed this earlier, but we have in the innovation framework a series of techniques to help you along, but there's also a series of pitfalls. Hey, don't do this. So this is us actually using what we learned in the innovation framework to say it might be more important, instead of telling you what to do, to give you some cautionary tales of what not to do. So if we take a look at this innovation framework overall, I would challenge you to take a look at these 18 questions up here and think, are these questions that we're grappling with? Are these ones that we've come up with very novel answers on how to solve? Is this an example where we can maybe share a pitfall that we've run into? There's a lot of innovative folks out there, and we have talked to a ton of customers. We even got feedback from one of our medical device clients. Terumo folks, give a shout out. Woohoo, woohoo. So they were grappling with this question of where do we find innovation? And you know, one of their folks there, man, he cut right to the point. He said, listen guys, everything's going mobile. And in fact, one day, even cars are going to be mobile. So it's that type of cutting insight that if you ask the right question, you'll actually get the right input. If you're grappling with any of these, if you want another perspective, if you want to share some of your scar tissue, I would recommend you give us a shout. We'll certainly share what we've got, and we'd love to learn more for you so I have more material to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much for trusting me with your time.